So thanks for coming this morning or this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are. Dean mostly is going to be leading this webinar, and we're going to talk. This is the third in the exciting XML series on talking about FME and how we work with XML. With this talk primarily focused on metadata and all the different things that we can do with metadata. And I'm here with Mark Ireland in sunny Surrey. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, and Dean is it sunny Sofia?
It's kind of gray Sofia right now, but it's pretty warm. Very green here, so yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, so let's get started.
So let me just double check. I just advanced the slide. I just want to make sure that pops up.
Yeah.
If anybody doesn't see the agenda on your screen, then please ping me.
We see it here, Dean.
Okay, good. So what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is metadata, and a lot more. All you wanted to know about metadata and lots more.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Dean, but Mark and I were talking earlier, and we both agreed we have never metadata that we haven't liked.
Okay. Well, we'll see some strange.
I'm not sure I agree to that.
Strange animals of metadata today. So we'll just a quick overview or intro about FME. A couple of words, not much. Then we'll dive into metadata standards, and then talk about how you can use FME to make your life easier to read and write, and in general, tangle with metadata and still survive. Walk away smiling.
Yeah, that's right. We make it fun. Yeah.
So certainly we recommend that you're using FME 2012 anytime you're doing anything with metadata, and Don can mention in a couple slides when we talk about the capabilities of FME that are relevant to metadata. But in general, definitely get your latest and greatest FME release from safe.com before you.
And so for all the demos today, you're using FME Desktop 2012. Are you using a professional Oracle? What are you using, Dean?
It's sort of the unlimited, I guess you could say, the Oracle, but it's also Service Pack 2.
Right. So everything you see here will work with the FME Esri edition, the Oracle edition, and the professional edition, unless we're writing to Geodatabase.
That's right.
Okay.
So, Don, what is FME actually?
FME is great question, Dean. It's some say it stands for Ferocious Memory Eater, but what it actually does is move data. So we're kind of unique in the industry. We don't build visualization tools. We don't build databases. We just focus on moving data from wherever it is to wherever you need it to be. And metadata, of course, is just one type of data. It's data about data, and the way FME essentially works is, you can see the architecture there. Really, it's a spoke and hub architecture. So it's able to move data from any one format or any combination of formats actually at once to any other combination of formats. So, and we talk about things like semantic translation, which means changing the data model as the data is moving, so that you're able to deliver to the applications exactly what they want. You're not just sort of moving the data and doing a syntactic translation, which doesn't really have much value to anyone.
And could this translation actually refer to translating from one kind of metadata to another?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No
Okay.
problem. That's where that transformational. Hey, there we are. That's Mark Ireland in the background for you people who wondered what he looked like. And that is not me in the foreground. Okay. So this just shows us, using FME to move data, and that's really, this is just sort of to show what we do. As far as we're the only folks who focus on just this moving of data, and we have about 100 people here who, with probably a little more than half, well, probably 2/3 being technical, whether they be development or support or professional services. And there you go. It's about unlocking the power of data. We like to say it's safe, that if your data isn't moving, you're not getting any value out of it. And so our whole thing we work on is, with all our products, is helping you keep your data in motion. so that you're able to extract all the value out of your data. Okay, this looks good. What do you got going on here, Dean?
Yeah, well, basically we're just talking about how FME can move between any kind of data or any format of data. We got started with CAD to GIS, and then we added on the ability to deal with raster and databases, and then onto the web formats, which all of that was actually good background for us to be able to deal with metadata. So not only can we deal with all of the types of spatial data, but now with our capabilities predominantly related to XML, we can help you slice and dice your metadata and support you that way.
That's one really ugly tourist there, Dean.
I think that slide came from our training course. It just shows one of the barriers to interoperability that FME overcomes.
And this just shows us all the different types of data. And of course, metadata is data about data, so it covers all those different types of data. So it's not restricted to CAD data or GIS data. Any kind of data has metadata, with it. Who created it? When was it created? How accurate is it? All those sorts of things. And so that's what we're going to talk about here today, is about this metadata concept, which is as more and more data is available on the web, the importance of metadata only goes up. In the old days, organizations would actually capture all their own data and for a specific purpose, and so they inherently knew what this data was good for. Now, more and more, we're finding data sources on the web, and so in order to determine if the data that we find is actually applicable to a particular use, this metadata is really, really, really critical.
And just I'm reminded by this slide that that's sort of a handy side effect of using FME to work with your metadata. Because we can read and write to all of these other types of data, that helps you when you want to harvest information or validate, does your data match up with the metadata, because we can read and write almost anything.
And also we can, that's a great point, Dean. And also we can use the fact that we can read and write all this to generate metadata, because many times the metadata will have, a bounding box and coordinate system as part of it. And of course, the fact that we can read all this data and extract the coordinate system information, the schema information, and the bounding box information, enables us to generate metadata on the fly.
Yeah.
Automatically. Yeah.
And if you could make sure you speak up, Dean. A couple of folk have said you're drifting in and out in volume, so if you can speak up, that'd be great. Thanks.
No problem. So yeah, this is just a review of all the formats that we were talking about, and maybe we can go to you guys can fire up that poll question. So how many of you have been?
Okay, I will do that.
For how long?
Yeah. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to fire up the poll question here. Polls, how long have you been using FME? Okay, we're going to launch. So here we go. So people should see the poll now. Okay, so you should see how long you've been using the poll. The poll's in process. There's a slide. Okay, so 67, 70%, about 20% do not use FME. So here we go. We're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll. And and I'm going to share the results with you now. Okay. And just so you can see them. So there's the results of the poll. Hopefully everybody can see that. Can you see that, Dean?
No, I don't see it, but.
Okay. Well, maybe it didn't. Okay. Anyway, we'll share these later. About 35% have been using FME for more than 3 years. 30% for 1 to 3. 3 months has been 8%, and less than 3 months is 9%, and then 21% do not use FME. So there we go. Okay. So I will now hide the results on that, and we're back to you, Dean.
Okay. So now that's enough about FME at the moment. What is metadata? What are we talking about here when we're talking metadata? Besides, you know, lots of jokes about the mystery of it, what actually is it? And as Don already mentioned, it is it's data that describes your data. And so specifically, and when I did a little bit of research on this just to try to get the terminology right, there really is two types of metadata. There's data that describes your data structures, and then the content itself. And so maybe there are purists in the audience who only think that real metadata describes the structures, and then you have meta content that describes the content. But we'll just call it all metadata for now, and
yeah,
we can duke that out later.
That's right. That's right.
But specifically, we're talking in terms of the structure, we're talking about, okay, what tables are involved, what geometry types do they accept, data types, maybe what fields go into those tables. And in terms of the content, as Don already said, yeah, you might want to be able to extract the extents of the data, so somebody knows if that data relates to their area or not. Modification date's important, so you know if it's up to date. And who created it, who owns it, who has access, so all that kind of information. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about metadata. There's another way of looking at it, so basically describing your resources, describing who created them, who manages them, and who has a right to retrieve them. So that's another way of talking about it. And then USGS has a nice link here which kind of summarizes some of the main questions, because you get these massive metadata documents and you kind of think,
yeah,
what are the questions behind these? So translated to English, these are, you know, again, how can we describe our data in a way that allows people to decide, is that data going to be useful to solve their problem, or are they going to download something overnight only to find out it's, you know, completely wrong for them?
Yeah, yeah. So these are the questions that metadata answers.
That's right. So,
okay.
Speaking of questions, back to the poll.
Okay, so we'll launch another poll here. How often do you work with metadata? Okay, here we go, launching the poll. Okay. Okay, wow. About half of you use it regularly. 20% rarely, 4% never. Okay, so obviously you're anticipating starting to have to use it. Okay, and we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, closing the poll, and now we will share the results. And you can see that the bulk of you use metadata regularly, 44%, 32% occasionally, 20% rarely, and 4% have not worked with metadata yet. Okay, so now we will hide those results. And back to you, Dean.
Okay, so when we're talking about metadata, pretty quick, I guess there wouldn't be too much point with metadata if there were no standards at all, because then you would probably need some metadata to tell you what your metadata is about, which there is a special discipline on that. Maybe we can do a webinar on that at another date, but I think most of you probably just want to work with the established standards and not make new ones, hopefully.
Yeah. That's it.
And so we're talking about the established standards. It's the two big ones are the FGDCs and the ISO 19115. There are some implementations of the 115 in terms of whether or not they're used for XML or for web services. We'll see that in a minute. But predominantly, these are the ones that are used to describe geographic information.
Okay, okay. And one of the nice things with FME is, of course, we don't expect you to have to understand all these metadata documents. And Dean's going to show you, and we're going to get into some demos in a minute. Basically, if you get a sample that's acceptable to the organization that wants a metadata or your own organization, then with FME, simply with a sample, you're able to very quickly, populate those metadata documents without having to dive into understanding the complete metadata specification.
Yeah, so without having to go and read about metadata for the next month, I think the main thing is to know, well, who do you have to collaborate with, or who do you have to validate against? So if you're part of the Inspire community, then you're probably going to be using the 19139. standard, which is the XML implementation of the 115, and then the 119 is for web services. But again, if the main thing is to know what GML version and what ISO standards you have to comply with, and then we can help you do that.
Yeah, good.
So speaking of standards, again, a quick poll question in terms of what standards people are working with the most.
I've just launched the poll, and we have a number there, and they're coming in fast and furious. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and we're going to close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll share the results. And wow, it's almost an even split across the board. 48% for ISO, 43% for FGDC, 53% for Esri, and then 11% for other. So it'd be good if you could tell us what those other ones are, just to make sure that that we're able to help you. In any event, if the metadata standard is using XML, then we're with FME. Everything that Dean's going to show in the demos here is going to be completely valid for you. So
somebody suggests we add "don't know" to that.
Yeah, there was supposed to be "don't know," but anyway, that was a poll. Usually we have other or none or whatever. Yeah, "don't know." That's good. Good point.
And is Inspire, is that an ISO standard, or is that completely different?
Yeah, good question. Inspire is based on the ISO. Yeah, so it's using the 19115 or 19139, depending on what part of Inspire you're talking about, whether you're dealing with straight GML or web services. But it does raise an important issue, is that even though we're talking about standards here, there are a lot of different flavors to the various standards, and so you might have a little bit of trouble figuring out exactly which flavor of the standard you're supposed to be using. And so you might need some support from whoever the standards guys that you have to cooperate with.
Yeah, and always good to ask them, hey, do you have an example of a metadata document? Because then if you get that, you're off to the races. Okay, so now Dean's going to run through a number of demos. Is that right, Dean?
That's right. Yeah. So you can see here we're going to talk.
And to be clear, we made more demos than we can possibly get through in this time. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a movie of it. We're going to go through all we can today, but then we're going to make a movie of all of them, and then we'll put them on the youtube.com/FME channel, and then they're there for you to as a resource. So the movies we do today, the videos we do, or the demos we do today, plus the ones we don't, all of those will be up as separate how-to videos on FME channel. So.
Yeah. So if I get carried away and having too much fun, then Don can pull out my rug and bring us back down to earth, and then you can see see a rerun of these anytime you need to.
Yeah.
Okay. So without further ado, let's go and talk about. Let's try out the reading right away.
Okay.
And we're going to use. Well, first off, I'm going to just look at some raw data. In this case, it's LiDAR data.
Okay.
And I'll open that up with the data inspector, because, hey, we are always looking at the viewer, and the inspector gets lonely. So there's lots of cool stuff that has been done recently.
Yep.
So here you go. Here's a nice 3D data set. And why are we looking at 3D? We should just be looking at text and stuff. Well, that's because you'll notice if I click on a single point, I just get the X, Y, Z of that point. But when I drag a box, and it's the same for raster, if I drag a box on the data set, then I get all of the attributes associated with that data, the whole data set. And so you can see here there's a file creation date, there's the generating software, and even project IDs. So these are all things that you could actually extract from this data set to make a metadata record for it. And also the extents are down here as well. So there's the min-max extents. So so I just wanted to show you, even though we're talking a lot about metadata and XML, built into FME's ability to read data, we often read a lot of information that, let's say, integrated, you know, studio oriented or end-user applications typically hide that information or use it for styling. We let you see all of the I don't know whether you call it the ugliness or glory of your data under the hood. Okay, so next up is reading some actual metadata. So this is what the data looks like to begin with. And so we just have standard GMD metadata. And so there's a couple of ways we can read this. And this is a bit of review. If anybody's been on a XML webinar, we're going to be reviewing or applying the concepts that we've been talking about with FME 2012 with regard to working with XML. So in order to slice this XML and convert it from this nested structure that you see here into relational records, we have to tell FME at what point am I going to interpret a record. So I can now right-click on this and go open with Workbench. And then in the now I don't want to read AIXM probably at this point, so I'll make sure I get the right reader. And elements to match, I'm just going to put MD metadata and see what happens. Now I can turn on flattening as well, because otherwise I'll just get these kind of XML buffer structures. Just for fun, we'll put FFS here. First time, basically the whole data in big record. And so you can see this is rather long and involved, but it works. You know, you have access to all of the fields here, and you can then read it, and I can redirect this to my viewer. So FME can read it. That popped up. So the trusty viewer, and don't forget to select no geometry because this stuff doesn't have any geometry at this point. And you can see some of the authoring and contact info from that data set. But you notice it's only one record. Now, a better way to do this, I'll start from scratch again. And open with Workbench. Now, I just happen to have a list of tag names in here, but I could just as easily search them out.
Right. So what you did here is you went through that document in the text and you identified the paths you wanted, and then you're just obviously to save time, you just saved them in a file. So yeah.
Yeah. So these are the tags I want to match on: contact, identification info, distribution info, data quality info. I could have just as easily, yeah, like you said, I could have gone through them and just said, yeah, that's identification info. I want to pull that in as a separate table.
That's right.
One of the clues about that is if you collapse these, you see that they repeat. So generally, things that repeat, you might want to pull them out in a separate table. Otherwise, you've got a complex list structure to deal with.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there we go. And it should scan that data set and then pull up 4 different feature types for me. And by the way, this will work with any XML, not just metadata, but we're happen to be demoing metadata today.
Yeah.
Okay, so fire that off, and now you'll see we've got 4 different tables. And now if I just want only contact info and nothing else, that's easy to do. I can just select only the contact info, select no geometry, and you can see there's all the contact stuff.
Right.
I know some of you are going to say, oh, aren't those field names too long? Hold that thought. In the subsequent demo, we'll see how to trim those down a bit. But yeah, here's some contacts. Let's look for data quality, because I think that had more. One of these had more records. Yeah, distribution info had multiple records.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
So moving on. let's see where we are in our deck. So that was just reading. Don't forget about the flattening options. Also, don't forget that we have an HTTP fetcher, so you don't have to read from a file. You could read from a URL and extract the information the same way.
Mm-hmm. Will the XML reader read from a URL? I think it will.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
No problem. Most of any of the web formats that we call web formats, things like KML, what have you, can read from a URL.
Yeah.
Now here I don't have time to go through all of these in detail, so I'm not going to run the Geodatabase metadata demo, but I just want to highlight that certain formats have special metadata capabilities, and Geodatabase is one of them. So you can choose the read mode of features or metadata. By default, it reads features, but if you flip it around, then instead of each feature class giving you whatever, X hundred records, it will only give you one record, and that's a record of metadata.
Okay, so if I want to read both, then I would duplicate the reader and have the first reader reading just metadata and the second reader reading the features?
Exactly, and then if you needed the metadata before you had the features, you'd have to make sure that the metadata reader was on top.
That's right, because FME reads in the order that they are, yeah.
So you have to expose...
Sorry, Dean,
yeah,
just
go
to
ahead.
mention, because a lot of users I saw haven't used FME before, so we do have, and a lot of them are interested in Esri, so we've got Geodatabase readers for file Geodatabase, SDE, personal Geodatabase, yeah. So we've got lots of readers and writers, different types for Geodatabase.
Yeah. And if you're trying to find that metadata, you have to expose, and I'll show you that the next time I'm in Workbench, I'll show you what it means to expose a format attribute, if that's a new thing for you. Okay, on the writing side, I'm going to have a demo pretty quick that shows how to do writing. And this is a template. This basically shows how we merge FME field values into a more complex XML structure. And this might look a little bit busy, but all you have to remember is that all of this blue stuff here on the right is whatever the template that you have is for your metadata, and the black sections in here where the mouse is, that the get attribute functions are calling in the value for each record. So that's
how did you do that? Are you going to show us how to do that?
Yeah, I'll show you in a minute.
Okay.
Fire that
so
up.
basically, if I had a metadata document that was good for my organization and had a lot of the boilerplate in it, I could just use that and then only replace the fields that are data set specific.
That's correct. And there's even functions for putting lists and stuff, but we won't get into that right now. So, and this is just a high level, and I'll run through this demo in a second, but basically the same pattern applies to most of our XML and metadata writing. So you'll read your data, do whatever processing or ID generation that you want, and then merge the field values in with the XML template. Now, in this particular workspace, what I'm doing is I'm doing things like computing the bounds in lat long for the data. So I have a bounding box accumulator, and I'm generating a timestamp, so we know when this data was last updated, as well as generating a unique ID. So why don't I go ahead and fire that off?
Okay.
So these are the source data sets, just a bunch of MIF-MID files. And what I want to do is I want to make an XML metadata record for each one of them automatically. Now, I won't build this thing from scratch. I'll just fire it up in the interest of time.
Yeah.
So if I look at the source data here, you can see I'm using a wildcard, so I'm taking up all the MIF files in that directory. So this could just as easily work for 100 files as it does for 3. I mentioned attribute exposer. So here we're exposing the base name. As I mentioned, you know, when we're reading Geodatabase, if you wanted the Geodatabase metadata, that would be one way to expose it. In this case, base name just corresponds to the file name. So we want to know the name of the data set. That's something we're going to use later on when we merge into our metadata.
Right.
The bounding box accumulator basically builds the bounding box geometry, and then the extractor gets the X, Y, min, max fields for that. And there's a lot more that you could do in terms of metadata harvesting. One thing I'm not doing here is I'm not extracting all the field names in each table. I could use an attribute exploder to do that. I could extract information about how long the fields are, how much data is in them. So there's lots of stuff I could do. I could even do some calculations on what type of geometry I have in there.
Yeah, and FME also has a schema reader that could be useful for that. That basically you point it at any data set and it's just going to retrieve the schema information, so field names, field types, and things like that. So
yeah, very good point. So yeah, maybe at the next version of this, I'll drop a schema reader in there, and we can combine that.
So is that your whole workspace there, Dean? It looks pretty small. So
yeah, I'm sorry, Don. I could have done something a little more impressive, but this is pretty small.
No, I like to make all my workspaces less than 15 transformers, so that obviously those are pretty simple ones, but it just demonstrates that it's not a huge amount of work what you've done here to be able to generate schema documents for in this case as many mid files as you want. So if you pointed this at a whole directory and said go, you would effectively get one metadata XML document for each of those files in one big run.
That's exactly correct. And yeah, so what I wanted to do here is just show you, okay, here are all the fields going into the XML templater. Yeah. And when I open up the XML templater, what I'll show you, actually, let me just open up the template file that's using.
Okay.
And you can either do it as an external file like this, or you can have it all integrated. So here, if I scroll down, you're going to see, you just look for search on FME.
There's one. Yeah, line 168 has one. Yeah. Yeah.
So here I have that base name. Remember I said that you expose the database name? Now I went and moved it. So under the GMD title, it's going to insert base name. And then if I keep scrolling down, there's the mod date.
Yeah.
So that's from the timestamp.
So it's just taking the value of the mod date attribute and dropping it right in place. Yeah.
That's correct. And then somewhere along the line here, here are my extents, the X, Y, min, max. And so basically the templater doesn't care how complicated the structure is. It respects the structure, it keeps it the same way, and it just merges in the values. Now, if we had a repeating structure, then we might need a sub-template or a feature template for that. And we can, we've got examples of that on FMEpedia. So what happens when I actually run this thing? We'll see. So it's going through all of the mid-MIFs and extracting the bounds and giving a timestamp, and it says successful. So let's see, we'll go to the output directory, and we can see that the timestamp is from now.
Yeah.
Shows us the clock keeps ticking. And if I fire this open, now we want to search for, what did we have in here? Well, I think something boundary. Yeah, so there's boundary area, so that's the title, so it merged that in dynamically. And if I skip down a bit more, oops, that mod date. I think I need to search for 2012 because this template is a bit older. So there's today's date. And if I go down a bit more here, we'll get to the extents. There's the XY min max. So that was all dynamically merged in for each data set.
Perfect.
So does that sound pretty clear, Don?
Yeah. Now what's this XML validator thing you got there? What's that about?
Okay, well, it's what this is doing right now. It ensures that the output is valid. It's only doing it for syntax because for this particular type of metadata, I didn't have the exact XSD file, so you caught me on that. But I do have a demo coming up where we actually validate against the ISO 19139. So we'll see that in a minute. But that's a very good point. There's not much point in generating metadata if it's not going to be valid for whoever's going to consume it.
Right.
And as a little trick to make it easier to iterate through, we don't have time to go through, like, let's say, a long diagnostic exercise. But sometimes what will happen is if you get all your XML on one line, and then it goes, error on line 1. That's not very helpful. So what I like to do is I like to pretty print it, and what that does is it gives the XML a structure that is much easier to do diagnostics on. Not to mention much more human readable. Right, Don? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that was a little bit about harvesting, and certainly we can do a lot more in a bigger workspace. This is about writing. Again, I don't have time to demo everything, but if you want to write to a geodatabase, if you want to write the metadata, there's two things you have to do. You have to set the allowed geometry to be GeoDB metadata, so not point or polygon, whatever it would be natively, but actually the metadata type. And as Don said earlier, you'd actually have to have a separate writer if you wanted to update both the data itself and the metadata in one workspace. You'd have to have two writers. You could, of course, have multiple feature classes per writer. And then you have to expose this is what we talk about exposing, checking this box, exposing the GeoDB metadata string.
Okay.
All right. Now, updating. So maybe while I'm firing this up, you can Don, why don't you tell us a little bit about how updating works?
Sure. Basically, the idea is we've got this request last year where somebody had a whole bunch of metadata documents that were already fine and valid, but they wanted to change, just a few fields like responsible party or things like that. So the last thing we want to do in a case like that is a template didn't really make sense because, of course, these metadata documents were quite different. And so for 2012, what we have now is something called an XML updater that enables you to specify exactly what within an existing metadata or XML document that you want to update. So, so we have a little demo here that shows how to do this. Now, we could really do a webinar or even a training class just on the XML updater because it has quite a number of options. So you could use it actually to write an XML document from scratch, but where its real strength is if you have something you just want to do a small update on. So, yeah.
So, yeah, thanks, Don. So what I want to do quickly here is just show you how the update is working, first based on just the input and the output. So I've got my good friend Johan van Plasmoiden that I went to school with way back when. Well, actually, he's not working there anymore, and so we've got to change. Yeah, it's sort of sad to see him go, but I think he's actually retired and moved to some obscure location in Southeast Europe. So he's having a good time. But maybe I think he's got a villa on the Black Sea. So we've got to update that name and replace it. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's not that hard. All we really need to do is know the path in that document to that tag. So in this case, it's just let me copy this into my trusty notepad here so I can see the whole field width. So it's individual name, character string. So this gives us the complete path. I guess it's the XML path in the document to the field that we want to update.
Right.
And we have a couple of different options. We can replace the contents. We could also replace the entire element itself. We could do a delete. We could do an insert, and we can even tell it where to insert. But in this case, we're just going to replace the contents. And what are we replacing it with? Somebody more responsible than Johan. I guess his name is Joe Malone. So we'll run that.
With a name like that, I don't know if I'm going to trust him with my data.
Well, at least we didn't be messing with the data, so he can't deny it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the updated XML, and we're going to see if that, in fact, worked. So here you go. You can see that the individual name character string was changed from Johan to Joe. So until Joe retires, then we'll know who to go to if there's a problem with this data.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And again, I'm doing some formatting and what have you there.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I've done a bit of talking. Why don't we turn it back over, Don? Maybe
we'll do
another
poll.
Yeah.
What XML tools do you use? Okay, so we're going to launch the poll, and here we go. We have an other and none this time. So Mark Ireland is doing the wave here. Okay, so let us know which of those you use, if any, and we'll give you a few seconds as people may decide which ones that they use. Okay, so we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll. Okay, we'll share the results, and you can see that 35% use none, followed by open source XML editors and tools, 36%, AltaNova, XML Spy, MS Studio, and others. So, we'll want to follow up with the open source and other to find out which tools folks are using. So thank you for that. And back to you, Dean.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Now, this is back a little bit to the standards. It is pretty critical, as I found out working on this, on some of the demos. This leads up to the whole validation demo I'm going to run through. It is pretty critical to know what to validate against. So I thought schema XSD sounded like a good thing to validate against, but I had this wonderful metadata that I had gleaned from the web, and I couldn't get anything to validate until I finally dug around and realized, no, you got to validate against this GMD XSD. So it does take a little bit of research to figure out what, in fact, you're going to validate against. With FME, of course, we can let you validate against almost anything, but you do have to know what it is. And I have a couple of resources here. I actually got some of this information from page 13 of the Inspire implementing rules. And there's even, I noticed this with Inspire, sometimes the best stuff's at the back. So you go to the very back of the appendix, and they actually have, lo and behold, they have a sample metadata record, and if you paste that into a text editor and save it as XML, you can validate it with the FME validator, the XML validator. So, yeah, so it's actually, there are some good stuff, some goodies buried in the stacks of documentation there.
Okay, good. And to be clear, the whole point of this is to make sure that you generate valid XML. It's very easy to generate invalid XML, and there actually is a lot. It's surprising how much XML, metadata and other, if you run it through a validator, it's actually invalid against the schema. There's a lot of XML out there that's syntax valid, but but it's not uncommon to come up to be given an XML document and it's not schema valid. So you're going to want to make sure that you really validate before you start distributing.
Yeah, and as Don reminded me earlier today, XML that was valid yesterday may no longer be valid today. If there's a URL in one of the namespace declarations and that URL doesn't resolve anymore, well, you're going to have trouble getting that thing to validate. So hopefully none of the URLs I depend on for this demo have gone away in the last half hour.
We've even had cases where an XML document used to be valid, but then the XSD documents later are changed, and so now the URL that we point to has an XSD document that's no longer valid against the XML. So you have to be really careful when you start, changing all these things, because of course the XML doesn't have its XSD within it. It refers to an external XSD document. So there's room for error there. Of course, FME will, whether they're schema valid or not. So FME is still able to get at that data.
Now, just to clarify, or just to make it clear how this validation is working here, normally you wouldn't know the problem with your data until you validate. But because we're going to see how good is FME at catching really obscure problems with data? Let's have a look. And if I go in here and I try to collapse this, well, that has a problem. So that's a clue right there. There's a problem. I can't collapse it. If I go to the very bottom, you can see that instead of having an end tag, it's missing the backslash. So that shouldn't be valid. Hopefully FME will catch that. And the next problem that we're going to see is bad schema. And we'll fire this through this pretty quick. But on somewhere down here, I happen to know that my date looks a little different. And this is pretty common if people have been using some kind of text editor to do some update, cut and paste, and they maybe didn't get the date format right. I mean, that to me, I can understand what that is, but maybe the schema doesn't like it. So we'll see what happens.
That's right. That's right. So
there's a couple of different ways to run this. I'll run it once just from desktop, and then I'll show you what it looks like to run it on server. So right now, I'm just going to point it at the bad syntax. And that's the only parameter I published because the user doesn't know anything about the ISO standards. The user doesn't really know much about all that are being validated against. It just says, okay, I've successfully validated. And in order to get the answer, they got to go to the results folder here, open this up, and they get a little CSV report that says, hey, you got a bad syntax, and by the way, it's in line 378, and the input ended before the last tag got defined. And oh, actually, by the way, the bad tag is MD metadata. So I think that would probably help me find my problem fairly quickly.
It would certainly help me.
Yeah. So it was down here. Now it wasn't this particular file; it was the syntax one, but that's where the problem was.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to show one other way of running this, and this might give you some ideas in terms of how to deploy this in your organization. So you don't have to have everybody with FME on their desktop.
Right.
So what I'm going to run through here is the same workspace, but it's published. That means it's now a web service, and all you need is a web browser now to interact with it. I can upload each of my files that I want to check. I can just select them. I could probably have them all zipped up in one, but just to make it. So I've selected them all, uploaded them. Now I can choose which one I want to run with, and this time I'm going to choose the bad schema. So the syntax should be right, the schema is not. So we'll see what happens there. FME on FME server. Now to get this, to publish this, I didn't write a single line of code. I just said, I went File menu and Publish, and now it's a web service. And that all the published parameters that you see exposed, when you run it from desktop, those automatically become parameters on that web form. And now you can see that, in fact, it did pick up bad schema on line 66, and that's that date that we saw. So that date's incorrect. So if I fix that, it should work. And so just to verify that when we fix it, it does work, in the good one, the date's correct and the end tag's correct. So I'll just run that quickly. And you could get this output report as a form, PDF with even a little map showing the bounding box of where the bad data is. So there's lots of ways you could display it. And here you go. Okay, now that you fixed everything, validation successful, and file length. Well, why did I throw that in there? You may have successful validation because it was like 0 bytes long. So I'm just being a little paranoid to make sure that, okay, that's according to that data set, that's what I would expect.
Great.
All right. So
excellent.
So let me just explain quickly before I leave that workspace how we did that. This validator, and Don pointed this out earlier, has a syntax-only check. There's really no point in trying to validate the schema if your syntax is bad. So that's why I do the syntax check first. And then if that passes, then we go on here and we validate against the schema. In this case, we're validating against the 139, 19139 GMD XSD.
Yeah, very good.
And that's pretty much it. After that is just kind of prettying things up for the output and copying the attributes over so that we have you know, a report that is more readable.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so.
Okay, that's awesome, Dean.
That's just some stats.
Yeah, these are just, there's your workspace. Yeah, so other things we could do. We could validate the coordinate system, make sure the data is in the right coordinate system. If there was some requirement for an organization to have all the data in the appropriate coordinate system, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, on spatial filter, we could use, we could actually render the bounding box from, we could read the bounding box from the XML and check to make sure all the data in fact falls within that extent. So lots of stuff you can do for validation. Some of this actually gets down to data validation. So there's that gray area, are you validating the data or the metadata? Sometimes you have to do a bit of both. Yeah,
no, that's good.
Maybe, Don, you can talk a little bit about CSWs, because I heard that you are the resident CSW expert. So what are CSWs?
Sure, we're running low on time here, but yeah, absolutely. CSWs, catalog services for the web, essentially are metadata repositories that that are out there. So we've worked with a number of them: Degree, GeoNetwork, Terra Catalog, and basically they have a front end which we can send queries to these CSWs, and what you're going to get back from a CSW is a metadata document. And in that metadata document, you're going to learn all the information Dean's talked about. Typically, you can also extract from that the location of the data. So it's great. These CSWs are great catalogs, or essentially you can think of them as card catalogs on the web. And you can use them to help find the data that's of interest to you, because you can search for keywords, areas, a whole bunch of things like that. So yeah, and with FME, we can easily read and write to those. So we can use FME to populate CSWs with metadata information, and we can also use FME to query CSWs as you search for documents. So there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe if we have time, a webinar down the road where we focus more exclusively on web services, then we can put together a demo that shows how.
I have a demo that I need to resurrect that was working with CSWs. Okay, so back to the polls here, and then we're going to move quickly. What CSW tools, here we'll launch the poll, what CSW tools do you use? So, and if you do specify other, please do let us know which ones that you're currently using, so that we can make sure that that we are aware of it and that we support it. And of course, if you do work with CSW tools and you're having trouble or you would like assistance, also let us know that too, because we're very much here to help you work with FME and meet all your data needs. Okay, so I'm going to close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and here's the results. And Esri GeoPortal extension is the biggest one. Okay, a lot of you at this time are not working with CSW, so that's interesting. And then the GeoNetwork is 11. A few of you are using the Degree, and some are using others. So please let us know if you're using other, which ones that you're using. Okay. And now back to you, Dean. And we have about 5 minutes left, Dean.
Yeah, well, I've got about 2 minutes left from what I need to cover. I'm pretty much done my demos. I'm just going to mention one or two things about implementations that are using FME to drive their metadata.
Yeah.
One that's been around for a little while, but that was really fairly impressive is GeoStore. So that's Arkansas's GeoPortal for distributing data. And every time you download data from them, you automatically get the metadata XML for that data set as well. So that's pretty cool.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, they've done a great job.
And then there's also Lithuania GeoPortal. And they're obviously, they have to do all sorts of things in the background related to managing, rights management, access management. So that's supported by metadata as well.
Yeah. No, that's great.
So maybe, yeah, just to summarize, I'll say a couple words, and then Don, maybe you can wrap it up. I guess, metadata describes.
I've got a couple of questions as well that might be worth.
Okay, we have some questions too. So wrap it up, Dean. Then we'll get to the questions. And I think we have a draw for some free online training.
Yeah, well, there's the 30-second summary is that metadata describes your data, and it helps a lot with data management and searches. FME can help drive your metadata because we can support both reading, writing, and updates, harvesting, and validation. And the key thing to mention is that all of the above can be automated, fully automated. So if you have a workflow for doing an update to your metadata, if you define that in a workspace, it's easy to automate, it's easy to publish it to FME server so that other people can access it. And ultimately, yes, I guess I like that screenshot there. So switching from manual to automatic with FME.
I like it. I like that. That's a great graphic. Yeah. So good. Okay. So we'll do the draw, or do you want to do? Let's do the questions first, and then we'll do the draw. Oh, okay. Some online. Oh, I guess we're going right. Dean says we're going for the training poll right away, Mark. He's the guy in control of this.
We'll wait.
That's right. He's the guy who's. So here we go. Launch poll. Would you like to enter for a chance to win one of 50 free seats? Yes, please. No, thanks. We should have had yes. We should have had yes, yes, please, no, and no, thanks.
Yeah. Or how about just no and maybe? Maybe we forgot.
Yeah, maybe. So anyway, we'll give that another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're going to close the poll now. Okay. And we'll share the results, and very polite group there, 85% yes, please. So we'll be getting back to you to let you know how you've done on your chance to win. So that's great. So now we'll hide the results, and now we'll go to some questions. Okay, Mark.
Well, one of the questions we had was, how do you write geodatabase metadata? Because you've got that option on the reader to switch between features and metadata, but there isn't the same thing on the writer. And basically, as far as I know, if you set the set a format attribute called GeoDB
metadata string or something.
I think it is.
Yeah.
You set that to GeoDB metadata, then FME automatically picks up that it's metadata and will write it for you. And you can actually look on our website, FMEpedia.com, and search for the term XML updater, and there'll be a great example of doing that, writing metadata back to a geodatabase.
Oh, there's a so if you go to fmepedia.safe.com and then you do a search for that, you'll actually find an example that shows exactly how to do that.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
And somebody else.
That's a very good question, because what I didn't mention here is that metadata string still has to be valid metadata. So you might need to be using in the workspace an XML templater to build the right ISO data structure to feed.
Right.
That whole thing goes into one field. So
right. And that care of 254 is not really care 254, obviously.
No.
And somebody else asked, do we use internal ISO schemas for validating data within FME? Do we store those schemas in FME?
Where we find, that's a great question. When we come across some XML schema documents that are very common, there is a copy of them in our local install of FME.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just to reduce every time we're working with them to download them all the time, because that can take significant.
But we're not limited to working with those. We just have those around for efficiency.
Yeah. So good. Anything else?
Yeah, there was lots of questions.
Okay, so we'll get back to everybody with all those questions. We're basically right on time here, so we just want to thank you all for tuning in. We know for some of you it's late, so we appreciate you staying and listening to this. We hope that you found it valuable, and if there are any other metadata problems you're having or XML problems, remember that we still have the XML challenge going on, so it's xml@safe.com. Send those in, and we're happy to assist with those. And also on the whole webinars, if there's some topics that we have not discussed yet that you would like us to do, let us know that too. So, we're here to produce as much valuable information as we can to help you work with data. So yeah. So any last words, Dean?
No, just to reiterate what you said, there's lots of upcoming training and webinars related to XML and metadata. There is the world tour going on across North America. I think it's mostly Europe now.
Yeah, and Europe's coming up. There's a lot of sites in Scandinavia in September. Ireland's coming up. You know, and so if you check there, you'll see all around the world. There's Australia's going this week. So there's these tour dates, and each city, they are free, and you get a really good lunch. So if you come for no other reason than you're really hungry, we're pretty sure you'll find it valuable. And so take a look, and there's probably a city near you.
And it's easier for us to throw prizes at you if you come to the World Tour event. Here it's a bit of a longer toss. So
yeah. So yeah. So
no, and I just wanted to also say don't forget about FMEpedia. If you go to that bottom link, if you just go to safe.com, click on FMEpedia, and search on metadata, you'll see a bunch of resources. And if anything,
and the YouTube FME channel there is how-to videos on everything. So that's a great resource too. And Dean's going to put up all his demos there, and there's a bunch of other XML demos there as well. So good.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody, and thanks for hanging in there. And if again, remember, there's the support. At support, we're always available to assist you as well if you hit a wall with any of this metadata stuff.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Dean. Thanks for your effort on this too, and signing out from Vancouver.
Okay, thanks, Don.